Wow. I I don't quite know what I was expecting with this, but this is like an actual. I assume the turbo lift is exit. USS Enterprise Starship class. How about Constitution class? San Francisco Fleet Yards. They got the plaque. They got all the stations. I guess I don't know what I can interact with exactly, or if I can interact with anything. Oh. Okay, so we can tour around. Ah, so it looks like we can. Okay. Gene Roddenberry, born in El Paso, Texas, and reared in Los Angeles, California, Gene Roddenberry had his first published work at the age of 10, a poem in the school newspaper. From that modest beginning, and spurred by an insatiable curiosity with a love for reading, Gene began a life of writing. One of his high school English teachers recognized Gene's knack for writing and took him under her wing, giving him encouragement and inspiration. In college, Roddenberry studied police science, his father being a policeman, and civilian pilot training. After receiving his associate degree and a civilian airman certificate, Gene enlisted as a cadet in the Army Air Corps. The summer that followed found Gene enrolling in peace officer training courses at UCLA. The attack on Pearl Harbor occurred that December and became the event that activated Roddenberry's military training. Before he left for active duty in the South Pacific, Gene married his college sweetheart, Eileen. After the war, Roddenberry became a junior pilot with Pan Am, operating out of Miami, Florida. His life was spared a plane crash that occurred in the Mideast, convincing Gene to seek an occupation closer to the ground. He returned to Los Angeles to work as a policeman, where he witnessed firsthand the transformation Hollywood was making to address the booming television industry. Gene saw a chance to earn some extra money moonlighting as a freelance writer for the emerging industry and soon quit the force when his ability to support his family as a writer was assured. Among his most notable work for television include writing for Highway Patrol, The West Point Story, Pat Masterson, Have Gun Will Travel, and The Detectives. Gene Roddenberry created the TV series The Lieutenant, for which he wrote and produced. After Star Trek, Gene produced for other film and television, returned to the Star Trek universe, working on the motion pictures and the Star Trek The Next Generation. Among the many honors bestowed on Gene Roddenberry are a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and the NASA Medal for Distinguished Public Service, posthumously awarded. He is survived by 3 children and his widow, Majel Barrett. So I guess Eileen died or he divorced her at some point. They don't really mention that. And certainly I know at least one of his children is very... Roddenberry? I forget his name, but I know he's active in Star Trek as a producer of sorts. I also want to add an addendum here that he did make 2 other sci-fi series. Well, technically one. One is Andromeda, starring Kevin Sorbo, which it's a bit corny, but actually once, if you watch it in order, starting from the beginning, it's actually an interesting series, and it's one I hope to finish someday. I don't think I've even made it all the way through the first season yet, before I just stopped having time to do that sort of thing, but it's interesting, and it's certainly a much more militaristic take on space than Star Trek ever was, or ever will be, God willing. He also, there was, I forget the name of the series, but I do know there was a series he had written, at least partially, but died before he could produce it, and I believe Majel or one of his children worked to get it made, and it's only a season or 2, but from what I remember, it's about aliens basically come to Earth, saying, oh, we're gonna help everyone, but, you know, they do the usual alien thing where they co-opt the government for whatever their mysterious and probably evil needs are, whilst pretending to give humanity technology and health and stuff. and dealing with that and a resistance that forms, an underground resistance that is violently suppressed at times. So I haven't gotten to that one at all, though. So William Shatner. Born in Montreal, Canada, William Shatner developed an early interest in acting by working for the Canadian Broadcasting Company before reaching his teens. He continued his education, earning a degree in business from McGill University in Montreal. After college, Shatner joined the Canadian Repertory Company in Ottawa. Subsequently, he enlisted with the Stratford, Ontario Shakespeare Festival under Sir Tyrone Guthrie. William Shatner's film debut came not long after in The Brothers Karamazov. Subsequently, he appeared in Judgment at Nuremberg. Some of Shatner's early TV work includes performances in Playhouse 90 and Studio One. One of his most famous pre-Star Trek TV appearances was in an episode of The Twilight Zone, which was later adapted as a segment for the Twilight Zone movie. I think he also played in some old westerns. I forget exactly which one it was, but I do know I was watching, it was one of them on Grit TV, Rifleman or something like that, but I know he played in a couple of those too. When Jeffrey Hunter declined to reprise his role as Captain of the Enterprise in the original Star Trek pilot, the center chair was offered to Shatner. He accepted the role of Captain Kirk, who was based on the heroic Captain Horatio Hornblower. After the Star Trek series completed its first run, William Shatner continued to expand his acting profession on television in T.J. Hooker and as host of Rescue 911. Currently, he stars in the syndicated Tech War, based on the science fiction novel series written by Shatner, which has also been adapted by Marvel Comics. I've actually read a couple of those books and seen at least a little bit. I think there's like one or more movies and then the TV series, and Shatner's a decent writer. Again, some people might consider it a little cheesy or corny, but it's basically a war on drugs in the future, where in this future, drugs can come in the form of computer chips that you plug into you, if I remember correctly, and they call it tech, T-E-K, and there's a lot of speculation that this series Shatner wrote about was actually kind of his way of dealing with his wife's drug addiction. Apparently she had an addiction to drugs for a while. Other writing credits include a definitive history of Star Trek, Star Trek Memories, and Star Trek Movie Memories written with Chris Kresge, a recent hardbound Star Trek novel, and a collaborative effort on the story for Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, which William Shatner also directed and subsequently chronicled the experience in Captain's Log, The Making of Star Trek V. Other film credits include roles in Airplane 2, the sequel, and National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon, along with numerous TV movies and specials. Among his other activities, William Shatner is also a champion horse breeder and lends his services to some very important charities for children and endangered wildlife. Well, that certainly explains why he had horses in Star Trek Generations. That must have been a nod to his work with horses, and also worth noting, he does continue. I don't know if he's still doing it now, but at least as of maybe around 10 years ago or so, I think that's when I was last actively reading Star Trek, when I had time for it. He has written for Star Trek. He's got like a series of novels where like the Borg revive him, and he has to face off against Picard, then he works with Picard to defeat the Borg, and it's not a bad series. Obviously, again, a little cheesy with the Borg revival plot and all, but he does finally get to marry his girl he loved from before he died, so at least there's something of a happy ending there. And I think that also ends up tying in with there was another series it was the A Time for series, or at least that's what I call it. It had like 8 books, like A Time for War, A Time for Peace, and all those other Bible passages, you know, A Time to Till, A Time to Harvest, or something like that, you know, were the names of all the books that focused on the events between Insurrection and Nemesis for the Enterprise. And that, along with Shatner's novels, fed into a trilogy, which obviously I think is non-canon at this point, unfortunately. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, where it was really interesting. The Borg make a full-scale attack on the Alpha and Beta quadrants. They're attacking the Federation, the Klingon, the Romulans. They're just pulverizing planets. The Federation eventually starts equipping their ships with the transphasic weaponry and shields that Voyager brought back from their journeys, and gives it to the Klingons, and that stems the tide for a while. But then the Borg adapt, which was Starfleet's greatest fear and why they had used it sparingly until that point. And it turns out that the Borg are an offshoot of some race in the Gamma or Delta Quadrant. And there was some sort of accident or incident where the crew of the Columbia actually crash landed on this planet, and then they were held captive there. They were given some great longevity, but all of the crew died except for some of the senior bridge officers, all female. And they're basically interred there and headbutted with this society a lot. But it turns out that society had an offshoot which turned into the Borg at some point. So eventually they and Starfleet managed, and Riker on the Titan with Troy and Picard on the Enterprise all managed to track this down and basically reunite the Borg with them and make the Borg peaceful. Not particularly fond of that storyline, simply because of just the excruciatingly large amount of deaths. Like, I think estimates in the books were that trillions were killed. And granted, there's some happy moments. Kirk, retires away with his love. Picard finally proposes the Crusher and all that, but I didn't like the war footing it was on, especially since, Voyager gives the impression that the Borg are maybe not quite soundly defeated, but of a lesser threat than they were. And I think with Starfleet's advancing technology, the Borg are a manageable problem. Oh, let's see. Leonard Nimoy. Native to Boston, Massachusetts, Leonard Nimoy became a professional actor at 20 years of age, having landed a small part in TV's Queen for a Day. A year and many small roles later, Nimoy had his first film lead in Kid Monk of Baroni. Among the many TV credits that followed were roles in Wagon Train, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Rawhide, Perry Mason, Combat and Mission Impossible, including many appearances in feature films. He has also starred in numerous stage productions, including Fiddler on the Roof, Camelot and Oliver, as well as on Broadway in Equus and Full Circle. As Mr. Spock, Nimoy gained worldwide recognition as the Vulcan member of the crew of the Starship Enterprise. Later, he expanded his influence on Star Trek lore, directing Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, along with story writing for Star Trek IV and Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, which Nimoy also served as executive producer. Additional directorial credits include The Good Mother, starring Diane Keaton, and the blockbuster hit Three Men and a Baby, starring Selleck, Ted Danson, and Steve Guttenberg. In the midst of his busy acting and writing career, Leonard Nimoy published his autobiography, I Am Not Spock, in 1975, plus writing 3 volumes of poetry and co-authoring a story with the late Isaac Asimov that later became the basis for the monthly comic book Immortals, published by Techno Comics. DeForest Kelley. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, DeForest Kelley spent a great deal of his early performing career as a singer. He developed his love for singing in an Atlanta church choir and later performed for live radio at station WSB. It was at Radio WSB where he earned a regular singing engagement with Lou Forbes and his orchestra performing at the Atlanta Paramount Theater. Serving in the U.S. Navy during World War II, part of Keller's duty included performing in Navy training films. It was Kelly's performance in one of these training films that caught the attention of a Paramount talent scout, which resulted in a screen test and a 2-year contract with Paramount Studios. Kelly's early professional acting career was comprised of performances during TV's golden age in such notable series as Playhouse 90, Slitch Theater, and Zane Grey Theater. His down-to-earth and contemplative acting style gained him notoriety as a consummate cowboy actor, propelling Kelly to regular TV performances in Bonanza, Gunsmoke, and Rawhide. That's what it was. I think it was Bonanza or Gunsmoke that Shatner was in. DeFOREST KELLE made his motion picture debut in Fear in the Night. Other film credits include Raintree Country, The Law and Jake Wade, Warlock, and the Western classic Gunfight at the OK Corral, which was referenced in a Star Trek episode, I do believe. Kelly and his wife of 50 years, whom he met while appearing with the Long Beach Theater Group, live in semi-retirement in Sherman Oaks, California. And certainly, as many know as of the time of this episode being, of me making this recording rather, Leonard Nimoy and DeFOREST KELLE and James Doohan have all passed away, and currently Nichelle Nichols is dealing with dementia. But actually, an interesting fact about DeFOREST KELLE, I kind of wish I had a few more about Spock or Leonard Nimoy, but I do know that he was afraid when taking his role on Star Trek, as he was worried after being in a series for as long as they had projected that he would be typecast as a doctor, and that he would only be called on to play doctor roles in future films and TV shows. And but he took it anyways, and funnily enough, he ended up being typecasted as a doctor, as I believe once he was done with Star Trek, his only other TV appearances were as a doctor. Walter Koenig. As difficult as it is to recall Star Trek before Ensign Chekhov, Walter Koenig was added to the regular cast at the start of the second season. Gene Roddenberry added the character partially in response to a Soviet publication's complaints about the conspicuous absence of Russians on the Enterprise, since the Soviets were the first with manned spaceflights, but also to meet the demands of NBC executives that Star Trek be made to appeal to the younger audience drawn to another popular NBC series, The Monkees. Koenig's acting career spans over 30 years of performing on stage, television, and motion pictures. He performed in the TV movie Antony and Cleopatra as Pompey opposite of Timothy Dalton and Lynn Redgrave, pilots for Goodbye Raggedy Ann and Gene Roddenberry's The Quester tapes, as well as episodes for over 40 different series, including a recurring role in Babylon 5. And that's... I can't remember his name in Babylon 5, but I know he's the... Walter Bester? Something like that? I forget, but... I do know he was, like, a really top high-level Psy-Corps agent that was kind of a antagonist for most of the series. There were a few times he cooperated with the Babylon 5 group, but in most cases he was working against the best interests of Babylon 5 and the greater good. So he's kind of a semi-villain in there. His first leading role in film occurred in Moontrap, which is regarded by many as a critical and financial success. Beyond acting, Walter also directs live theater, teaches and writes comedy, science fiction, comic book graphic novels, and nonfiction, including Chekhov's Enterprise, which chronicles the events during the making of Star Trek the Motion Picture. Nichelle Nichols. Born in Chicago, Illinois, Nichelle Nichols began singing and dancing as a teen and was discovered by Duke Ellington. She toured with the orchestra, creating and performing in a ballet for one of Duke Ellington's music suites. By the end of the tour, Nichelle was the orchestra's lead singer. Her television debut came with an appearance on The Lieutenant, where she met Gene Roddenberry, who later cast her as Uhura in Star Trek. During the time she worked on the original series, Nichelle had second thoughts about continuing with the show, but at a public event she met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who confessed to being her fan, much to her amazement. After admitting her doubts to him about continuing with Star Trek, Dr. King implored Nichelle to stay in the cast as a role model for other African Americans. Whoopi Goldberg and astronaut Dr. Mae Jemison are among many who cite Miss Nichols as their inspiration for beginning their careers. After Star Trek, Miss Nichols, I think it's Nichols. I do apologize if I'm saying it wrong, though. She went on to perform in film and stage, including the Sandy Howard film The Supernaturals and the touring Broadway hit Horowitz and Mrs. Washington, as well as reprising her role as Uhura in the Star Trek features. One of her recent stage productions, Reflections, has Nichelle Nichols performing a dramatic musical one-woman show in which she portrays 12 legendary female entertainers, which continues to receive rave reviews everywhere the production is performed. Her autobiography, Beyond Uhura, was recently published, and the science fiction novel is in the works. Miss Nichols also contributes her time recruiting minority applicants for NASA, for which she received NASA's Public Service Award. Some other background from other novels that all kind of tie together. Nichelle Nichols, or Uhura, we find out in the Lost Era series of books, which I consider to be mostly canon since it doesn't really contradict any established Star Trek canon. Uhura actually, by the TNG era, prior to the TNG era, still in like the Enterprise C era, and maybe a bit later than that, she becomes the head of Starfleet Intelligence. And likewise, Scotty, after being rescued from the Dyson Sphere in Relics, eventually becomes the head of the Starfleet Corps of Engineers, and he makes a recurring role in the Starfleet Corps of Engineers series of books, which was a fun series. I'd like to finish it sometime, but it was kind of one of the first ebooks, which, you know, is fitting with Star Trek trying to push the boundaries of technology, but it was like 10 to 15 years too early for its time. There wasn't really widespread adoption of ebook technology back then. Of like Kindle readers or the Barnes Noble Nook, for anyone that remembers that. That was my reader. And you could purchase the stories individually as an ebook, but they were also released in compilations of, I think, generally 4 to a book in paperback. And like I said, that's a fun book because it's just the almost purely the engineering side of Star Trek. You know, just a small crew on a ship that solves problems, and a couple of them actually are returning members from TNG. I believe Gomez and Duffy, Kiri and Duffy, both had minor roles in TNG at various points, and they end up being some of the senior officers on the Da Vinci, which is a Starfleet Corps of Engineers ship. They also have features like the Binars being a part of the crew, or Vulcan, obviously, and it's a pretty good read, and that's another one that I consider more or less canon, as there's not too much contradiction with established Star Trek canon in the forms of, if you want to refer to it as, so if you ever go to the Star Trek wikis, there's Alpha, Beta, Memory Alpha, Memory Beta, Memory Gamma, and that's kind of the how I take these were, you know, Memory Alpha being all the films and TV series, the animated series, you know, that stuff. You know, that's core canon. Then you got Memory Beta, which includes things like books and games, which, you know, you can take that as canon if it doesn't contradict the core canon. Kind of like the Star Wars extended universe, actually, before Disney did away with that. You know, they had that tiered system for canon where, you know, film was God, and then certain books were like tier 2, and most of the rest were like tier 3, you know, like other books and games. But yeah, most of the crew ends up getting another life in the 24th century. McCoy was head of Starfleet Medical, at least at the beginning of TNG that we see in Encounter at Farpoint. Not familiar with where Chekhov or Sulu ended up at, but let's see. Obviously, we know where Kirk went. I think that's all of them then. Kirk. Oh, I forgot. Spock then ended up as kind of the Federation ambassador to Romulus of sorts, you know, helping with the reunification movement there, trying to reunite the Vulcan and Romulan peoples. In any case, though, let's continue on before I ramble on for way too long. George Takei. Born in Los Angeles, California, George Takei spent much of his childhood in American internment camps during World War II. It was during those formative years he formed his love for acting, using every skit, play, and drama performance to pave the way to becoming an actor. Takei went on to earn his Bachelor and Master of Theater Arts from UCLA and attended the Shakespeare Institute at Stratford-upon-Avon in England. He also studied acting at Sophia University in Tokyo and at the Desilu Workshop in Hollywood. George Takei's professional acting debut was on live television in an episode of Playhouse 90. That certainly seems to be coming up a lot. To date, he has more than 100 television guest starring roles and nearly 20 feature films to his credit. Best known for his portrayal of Hikaru Sulu of Star Trek fame, George continues to appear in stage productions, including recently in the award-winning play Undertow at the Edinburgh Festival. Takei's personal endeavors include serving in community organizations, competing in marathon events, and authoring columns and books, including his biography, To the Stars from Pocket Books. Worth noting, I believe probably close to a decade after this game came out, he came out of the closet, and he's now happily married. I don't know his husband's name, and as such, he's been an advocate for LGBT rights, and also just an advocate for human rights in general, owing to the abuses he suffered in those internment camps, the abuses that all Japanese Americans suffered, when we just basically rounded up citizens because, hey, you look like you're from Japan, you look Asian, you have a Japanese name, we're putting you in these camps because we don't trust you now. Which, you know, I think it's safe to say that you never hear about any German internment camps, or German American internment camps, or Italian American internment camps. And even during the Cold War, you never had a Russian American internment camp, so I think it's safe to say that this decision was almost purely based on racism. In the same way that some people accuse people of Jewish or Israeli descent of being incapable of having an allegiance to any country other than Israel. And, you know, obviously I think most people want to get past times where we have thoughts and do things like that, since obviously it's not right. It's, you know, a violation of human rights, and frankly, it's an insult to these people. But So to that end, he's been a very vocal advocate against the, well, for lack of a better term, the concentration camps that Trump's been putting kids into during his 4 years in office, which hopefully will end shortly after this video gets released in a couple months. But, you know, it left a lasting impression on him, and as well it should, because it wasn't right. It wasn't right to do that. But before I go full bore into politics and social commentary here, let's continue. James Doohan. Born in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, as the youngest of 4 children, James Doohan enrolled in the armed forces at the start of the Second World War at the age of 19. He was among the armed masses to wait ashore on D-Day, and later went on to become a pilot assigned to aerial reconnaissance duty. It was during his Air Force career that Doohan gained notoriety as the craziest pilot in the Canadian Air Force, much to his chagrin. On an impulse, Jimmy Doohan enrolled in a Toronto drama school after the war. Not much later, he won a 2-year scholarship to the renowned Neighborhood Playhouse, a New York City acting school. Doohan's credits include live roles on TV and guest shots on Gunsmoke, Bonanza, and The Fugitive. To the world, he is known as Star Trek Scotty, but many are surprised to learn that Doohan is adept at many dialects, having performed many of the off-screen speaking parts for various aliens in the show. After the cancellation of Star Trek, Doohan found himself typecast and unable to expand his acting career beyond the Scotsman chief engineer role that brought him fame. Today, James Doohan, a grandfather of 8 and husband to his beloved wife WHITNE, is a regular speaker on the Star Trek convention circuit and is a perennial favorite of all the Trek fans. Certainly he was one of my inspirations. Just a couple of extra facts about him. In those D-Day landings, he actually lost one of his fingers. He seemed to be ashamed of his loss and took great pains to hide it in television, but there are a few points where you can see it if you watch closely. Most notably, there's a scene in The Trouble with Tribbles where he's got an armful of tribbles and you can see his severed finger if you pause the screen while his hands are in view. But he also talked a woman out of suicide once. There's videos and text about it on the internet, but basically a depressed woman sent him a letter indicating that she was going to, you know, that she loved him, that she thought he was a role model. Loved him in, like, fan terms, not, like, psycho love or anything like that. But just that, you know, she was depressed and she felt like she was going to kill herself. And he wrote back, he responded to her and basically said, "You're important, you shouldn't kill yourself, everyone cares for you, and I expect to see you at the next Star Trek convention." And sure enough, she showed up, and later she credited him as a hero who had saved her life, but Doohan, being modest as he would, just said he was doing the right thing. And so he has a lot of respect for me for that. He also has a honorary degree in engineering from the Milwaukee School of Engineering, which is my alma mater, as well as my father's. So it's nice to be able to say I got my degree from the same school as Starfleet's, I suppose, greatest technical genius, arguably one of the greats. Next Tucker and LaForge and Torres and O'Brien, but yeah, he was one of him along with LaForge and Tucker kind of influenced me in going in the engineering direction. A lot of people like to play out the fantasy of being a command officer in Starfleet, but I think engineering and sciences are where it's really at. And again, unfortunately, James Doohan has since passed away. May God rest his soul. Majel Barrett. Born in Columbus, Ohio, and reared in Cleveland, Ohio, Majel Barrett graduated from the University of Miami, Florida, with a degree in theater arts. After a year of law school, Majel moved to New York, determined to become an actress. Miss Barrett's acting career start came with 11 weeks of stock in Bermuda, followed by a 9-month tour in the play Solid Gold Cadillac. Later, Majel studied acting in Hollywood, including comedy with Lucille Ball, which led to a contract with Desilu Studios, and drama with Anthony Quinn, who introduced her to Paramount Studios, where she appeared in 3 motion pictures. Among her film credits are The Buccaneer, The Quick and the Dead, and most recently, Teresa's Tattoo, in which she performs opposite Nanette Fabray and Kiefer Sutherland. Majel's numerous TV performances include guest roles in Dr. Kildare, Bonanza, and The Lieutenant. Majel Barrett is regarded as the First Lady of Star Trek and has the distinction of having performed in every incarnation of Star Trek. Not only did Miss Barrett play the role of Christine Chapel in the original series and the motion pictures, but she also performed as the voice of the Enterprise computer and several alien voices. In addition, Majel appears in the original Star Trek pilot as First Officer, and as a semi-regular guest in Star Trek The Next Generation as the computer voice and Loxana Troy, as well as reprising her role as Miss Troy in Star Trek Deep Space Nine and as the computer voice in Star Trek Voyager. It was during her stint on Star Trek she met and later married producer Gene Roddenberry. Majel Barrett's other activities include serving as a member of the National Space Society Board of Governors, for whom she has appeared in public service announcements supporting the United States space program, and as president of Lincoln Enterprises, a mail-order firm specializing in Star Trek memorabilia. It's also worth noting that Majel Barrett, as well as Gene Roddenberry, have since passed away since this game was made. I forget exactly when she passed away, but it was fairly recent, I think, within the last 5 years or so. And obviously Gene Roddenberry, I think, passed not too long after this, because it was like the middle of TNG and the early parts of DS9. In fact, I think Unification, which is the episode featuring Spock and the Romulans, trying to reunite them with Vulcan, I believe it was that 2-parter that featured the remembrance to Gene Roddenberry. And lastly, we have Grace Lee Whitney. Native in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Grace Lee Whitney moved to Chicago, Illinois, where she began a singing career at age 19. Not long after, she was opening for Billie Holiday. Miss Whitney also completed in the Miss Chicago pageant and achieved first runner-up. Sent to New York City by her agent to audition for a role to the Broadway musical Top Banana, Miss Whitney won the role and understudied the star, as well as appearing in the film version of the play. Grace went on to perform in both the stage and film productions of The Pajama Game. Other film credits include Some Like It Hot, in which she performed opposite of Marilyn Monroe. By the time Grace Lee Whitney was 27, she had performed on a regular basis in nightclubs, on radio, and on Broadway. Subsequently, she performed in 17 motion pictures and in over 90 television shows, including Surfside 6, 77 Sunset Strip, and Lieutenant, where she first came to the attention of Gene Roddenberry. Miss Whitney played the role of Yeoman Rand in only 11 episodes during the first season, after which her character was cut in an effort to allow Captain Kirk to develop into more of a ladies' man. Grace revisited her role as Janice Rand in Star Trek The Motion Picture, Star Trek III The Search for Spock, Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, and Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country. And I actually have to admit, I don't remember her being in any of those movies. I'll have to rewatch them. Especially episode 4, because that's like 99% Kirk and his Elite 7, essentially, as I call them sometimes, or his bridge crew, probably more properly. They're in San Francisco in the past. Like, maybe she was in the background at Starfleet headquarters or something, but yeah, she was a notable character, even with her limited role in the original series, and it's a shame they cut her. I mean, there's no reason she couldn't be part of the show and also have Kirk as a ladies' man. It's not like you're married to your yeoman or anything, but today she resides in the foothills near Yosemite National Park, California. Miss Whitney has a busy, fulfilling life, regularly addressing Star Trek convention audiences and other speaking engagements, including television shows on themes of inspiration and hope. Something I think we all need a little bit more of these days. Curious. I actually don't know her status as of right now. I guess I'll look it up quick. Grace Lee Whitney. By accidentally putting Grace Lee Whitney. Thank you, autocorrect. There we go. Oh, that's unfortunate. She passed away in 2015. Really sad watching so many of my childhood heroes just succumb to the ravages of time. Alright, so that's our first console here. Looks like there's nothing else to click, so we will proceed to the next console and see what that gets us. It looks like the only thing... Wait. Does the whole console do that? Oh, I suppose it does. Just to make sure, because last time I think I clicked there. Okay, so the whole console is just one option. Just want to be careful they didn't hide things. I mean, this is a 90s adventure game after all. Interview with Leonard Nimoy. Oh, watch the entire interview. Okay, do that.
I don't know. I don't know what kind of programming in general is being done by Hollywood studios for interactive, but I think Star Trek lends itself to interactive. Star Trek is a vehicle that fans have been attracted to and have wanted to interact with in one way or another for the last 26 to 27 years. The technology now makes it possible for them to really do that. We've had over the years Star Trek attractions at theme parks around the country, for example, where a small group at a time of young people would be put into Star Trek uniforms, get on a stage and act out a line or two with a group of other actors, and then have themselves injected into a Star Trek videotape that they can take home and show their family. Here I am with Mr. Spock, here I am with Captain Kirk, or whatever. Saying this line or that, there I am, you know, that kind of thing. So there's always been, for many years, that kind of desire. Everybody knows that there have been hundreds and hundreds of Star Trek conventions over the years, and people come out to meet and talk about Star Trek and exchange ideas about Star Trek and watch Star Trek episodes and films together over and over again until they know the dialogue well enough to read it back to the TV set. To listen to speakers who have had anything to do with Star Trek. If anybody who's been a visitor on the set of Star Trek has become a celebrity in his hometown. There's a tremendous need to interact with these people because we are presenting a world that touches the imagination. We're presenting a positive future world that a lot of people would like to be in touch with. And I think now the technology makes it possible for them to really feel that they are involved in a very real physical way with the story that's playing itself out in an interactive process. The appeal of entertainment on CD-ROM is the switch from passive to active. Instead of switching channels to see another show, you go to work on this one and change the program, change the course of the event of the plot. From an actor's point of view, it's a process of making it all work through vocal work. We are not involved physically on camera in this particular program. On the other hand, it's a little bit more complicated because each line has to serve, each reading of each line of dialogue has to serve a number of purposes. because the story could diverge from that line on into different directions, depending on what the viewer chooses the plot to go to. I think that we have a big advantage in that, having played these characters and having lived with these characters for a long period of time, we tend to know how the character would respond in certain situations. If we were in the process of creating a new character, I think it would be more difficult. I think we'd have to do more research, more study, more discussion about, well, how's the character going to act if he's in trouble? How's the character going to act when he gets out of trouble? We know the answers to those questions. We've been with these characters for a long time. We know the relationships between the characters, the relationships between Spock and McCoy and the captain and Spock, all the rest of us with Uhura and Scotty and Sulu and Chekhov. We understand what these relationships are all about. They go on like a soft glove. You put it on and you go to work. So I think we have the advantage in that respect over other people who might have to be creating new characters for this medium. It seems to me that the incredible challenges are for the writers, because the writers have to design and develop so many different tracks of the story. When you make a motion picture or an episode of television, you're creating one story track, and that's going to be the story that you tell. In this medium, you're creating several story tracks, and each of those story tracks can branch off into different directions, so it multiplies geometrically. And there's a lot more work to do, starting with the writing, a lot more work to do with the recording and the editing of all this material. It's quite an enormous task, very complicated. I don't know exactly what will be happening in theatrical interactive, but I think certainly in this process, in CD-ROM interactive, it's going to be light years ahead of the theatrical interactive, if it ever happens theatrically, because I think the cost of doing it theatrically would be too enormous. So I think this is the ideal medium for it. I can't say I was really surprised. I thought this has been some time in coming, and certainly as time has come. Our stories lend themselves to this kind of imaginative adventure. The plot lines that can be created in this kind of a process are I think, excitingly obvious. I thought, well, here it is. We've been hearing about all these various means of delivering information, of capturing information on a disk, and the quality moving so quickly, the technology moving so quickly. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised we're here doing it. We seem to be in exactly the right place at the right time, doing exactly the right thing. I would think they'll feed each other. I would think that Star Trek, the original classic episodes as well as the Next Generation episodes, will be running on television for the rest of time that we know, and I would think that the interactive will lead people to be interested in the original episodes and vice versa. I'm not sure about that. I do believe that interactive I do believe that interactive in a purely theatrical situation, where people pay a price to walk into a theater and sit down, will have certain limitations. I think the cost of producing interactive films, and I think there have been some experiments which have not been too gloriously successful, where audiences vote on how the next scene should be played or how the story should evolve from here. I'm not sure that that's what people want when they pay their $7 or $6 or $5 or $4, whatever they pay, to sit down in the theater and watch a story. I think they do go for a collective experience where everybody experiences the same story. On the other hand, I think it's very exciting in terms of use of computer technology at home, for the interactive we're talking about specifically. I do believe that there are times when I or my children or grandchildren are watching television and flipping through the channels, and you go through now if you have cable television and you subscribe to some services, you might have 20 channels, I guess, or maybe 25 or even 30 channels, and somebody shuts off the TV and says, well, there's nothing on. Amazing. What we're really saying is there's nothing on that captures our imagination tonight. There's nothing on that we really must see. So perhaps what we're looking for is something that we want to do, something that we can affect, that rather than being passive, rather than sitting and watching stuff that somebody says is what we should be seeing tonight. Maybe there's something that we want to get our hands on. Maybe we want to say, well, what would happen if this would go this way? Or what would happen if, let me work with that. Let me explore that. What's hidden in here? What are the secret tracks and avenues in here that I don't know about yet? That's, I think, is very exciting stuff. Very different from just turning on to see what's on. Turning it on to see what you can do with what's on. And what's hidden and what is not immediately obvious, but you discover for yourself, I think is a very exciting process. Well, yes, and using very professional visual techniques and using the professional actors who play these roles and guiding them through the adventure and watching them make mistakes that you've led them to and watching them solve problems that you've helped them solve by picking up certain clues and certain evidence, I think is a very exciting new experience. The possibilities for imaginative stories are endless. Much like in the animation business, and yet even far more complex and credible. As a person in my business, you become very much aware that anytime you create a story idea that has any imagination or size or canvas or scope to it, you are also creating budgetary issues. You're creating costs. Anytime you say, well, there are 1,000 people listening to a person do a speech and you want to shoot that scene, those 1,000 people are going to cost you a lot of money. So somebody in the budget department comes down and says, can you do with 100? Or can you do with 50? You know, and everything starts to shrink down to what one can afford. Well, to draw the animation for the 1,000 may not cost much more, if anything more, than drawing the 50 and having them replicated 20 times, and you've got your 1,000 people. So the opportunity to tell larger stories, more exciting, more complex stories, to give more texture, to give more scope, more size, more mystery, more magic. The opportunities are endless. It just depends on how vivid the imagination is and how much energy you have to put into it, as opposed to money to put into it. So in that respect, it's very exciting. You can do stories, you can develop ideas that might have been much too costly to do before this medium came along. I've had a good time with Star Trek and Spock over the years, and I consider myself very lucky to have become connected with a project that has had the lifespan that Star Trek has had. Did we know when we were making the original series that we would now be, 27, 28 years after going on the air, that we would still be around working the Star Trek territory? No, certainly not. Couldn't have predicted that. But I did know, I think I can honestly say, I did know when we were making the original episodes that there was a durable substance to what we were doing, because the stories had a certain kind of durability, a certain kind of integrity. We were dealing with issues which are eternal issues, not simply issues of today or this week. And we were not, I don't think, trendy. We were doing sort of classic ideas, dealing with large classic thematic ideas, social issues, territorial issues, issues of population, issues of hate, greed, vengeance, the very large passions that came down to us from the Greek drama, from ancient times. So I did feel that the stuff that we were doing was durable, as compared to some other television series of the day, which were more topical and maybe even hotter and more exciting and more popular at the time, but not anywhere near as durable. And for that reason, I find myself not surprised that we're still doing it. I'm very pleased that I've been connected with something that had that kind of longevity. We are now, in a way, seeing the same kind of technological revolution in entertainment that happened when sound came in and replaced talkies. It's just as great a step forward, greater even. Because you could sit and enjoy a movie even before sound, even before talkies. But now I think the changes, the advancements are are by great leaps and bounds today, as opposed to being able to walk instead of crawl. We are now able to take gigantic leaps technologically. To see some of the things that are being done in special effects these days by a lot of companies, instead of perhaps just one or two companies that are experimenting with and crudely performing certain kinds of what we at one time thought were wonderful special effects. Now there are a lot of companies that are capable of doing it very quickly. They're mastering these techniques. Computers have given us the power, the electronic power, to do enormous accomplishments technologically. So I think we really are moving very, very quickly towards whatever the mind can imagine that we can accomplish. One of the things about Star Trek that has, I think, made it so successful is that we have portrayed a successful and exciting future for mankind. And I think that's what we're seeing now in the technology. The technology is leading us to that. I think CD-ROM is the next logical step in technological evolution, obviously. The difficulty for me in moving from acting to directing was that the first two movies that I made as a director, I was also performing in the film. So I was doing what a lot of other very successful and very talented people have done before, which is to act and direct in the same movie. Woody Allen has done it. Clint Eastwood has done it. Chaplin certainly did it, movie after movie. I found it particularly difficult to do. And one of the very simple reasons for the difficulty was that my makeup takes, when I do Spock, takes about 2 hours to put on. So in the morning, if the director had to be at work at 7 a.m., I had to get into a makeup chair at 5 a.m. to get my makeup done by 7 so that I could step out of the chair and start directing the movie. That would add 2 hours a day to what would be a long day anyway. It could be a 12 or 14-hour day, and add 2 hours for makeup. You've got a 14 or 16-hour work day, or longer sometimes. I'm much more comfortable doing either one or the other. And in fact, when we did Star Trek 3, I worked very hard at designing a story where there was a minimal amount of Spock, frankly, in the movie, so that my first feature would be a little bit easier for me to direct and occasionally act. In Star Trek 4, I did a lot more on-camera work. And the movies that I've made since, I have avoided acting in for just that reason. I like both very, very much. I like acting and directing both. But for me, acting and directing on the same film is not a pleasure. It's a task. I'd rather do one or the other. That was the toughest part of the transition. The easiest part of the transition came because I have been around sets, movie sets, ever since the 50s. I've been at it for about 40 years. So I obviously have been around some very talented directors and watched a lot of very good people do the job and learn how to do it. The benefit that I had was that I had played Spock for many, many years before I stepped into this directing work. So I knew the character. It wasn't as though I was trying to create a new character and needed to look around to ask people, does this character work? You know, I pretty much knew what makes Spock tick by the time I started directing the Star Trek films. So that helped a lot. I was acting around. I was, as they say, around in the labor pool. In the 60s, I had done a lot of television, an occasional feature. Actually had been in the business for about 15 years. I did an episode, I did a guest starring episode of The Lieutenant. Guest starred portraying a movie actor in an episode of The Lieutenant, which was Gene Roddenberry's series. And he was in the process of rounding up people to act in the pilot for Star Trek. And my agent called me. I never met Gene when I was making the show. He was away out of town somewhere, saw the show after it was finished shooting. My agent called me and said, I had a call from Gene Roddenberry. He says that he's developing a pilot for a television series, science fiction. He's interested in you, and you'll be hearing from him when he gets ready to cast. And I immediately put it totally out of mind. I thought, we're now talking about a guy who is developing a pilot, who thinks he has a role in that pilot that he might want to use me for. The pilot may never be shot in the first place. When it is, by the time it is shot, they'll probably change their mind 6 or 8 times about who should act in it, and then its chances of being sold are almost nil. At that time, there were a lot of pilots made, and very few were chosen, as they say. So I just put it out of mind. I'd been around long enough that I didn't put any stock in it. But sure enough, 3 or 4 or 5 months later, I was called to meet Gene Roddenberry at the studio. And I went to see him thinking that I was going to audition for a role. And when I got there, Gene started introducing me to a lot of department heads. This is our property department head. This is the person who's going to do our wardrobe. And I was looking at wardrobe designs. I was looking at props. I was taken to the stages and looked at sets. And I thought, they're going to shoot this thing. And I wonder when I'm going to be asked to read some scenes. And I never was. And he shook my hand and said, I hope you like what you've seen, and we'll be in touch. And I thought, I think he's telling me he wants me to do this job. You know? And that's pretty much the way it happened. He had seen the work that I did in The Lieutenant. He had seen some other episodic television work that I had done. He had rounded up some other films that I had appeared in and made the decision that I should be the guy. The network was extremely leery of a recurring character who you would see a lot of in a television series, who looked to them devilish, and they thought frightening to an audience. It was really interesting. In those days, I'm talking about 1964, I think was the first pilot. The concept for making a pilot for a television series was you bring together a group of 3 or 4 or 5 principal actors and actresses, each of whom represent a segment of your potential audience. The male lead should be the guy that the father in the American family can I relate to and identify with. The female should be the lady that the mother in the family can relate to and identify with. The kid in the show should be the person who appeals to the kids in the audience, and preferably this family should have a pet. And the pet should be a typical dog or whatever that'll come when you call it and bring you your slippers, you know. It was the American family kind of concept. Here's this guy with the pointed ears. And the feeling was, who in the American audience is going to relate to him? How many people out there have pointed ears? How many people, aren't there going to be people who think this guy is scary and devilish? And they actually asked Gene Roddenberry to first replace me and change the character, and then at least take the pointed ears away. And after we shot the pilot, and there were some sales brochures printed up for the network publicity department and sales department to show to potential sponsors, to show them the story of the series, what it would be about, and what the characters would look like. Because I was in the pilot, I was on the mailing list, and I got one of these things in the mail. And I opened it and I looked at it, and to my shock, my ears were round. I thought, what's wrong with this picture? There's something wrong here. My ears were perfectly rounded. And I called Gene and I said, have you seen these photographs? He said, yes. And I said, what does this mean? And he explained to me that they were concerned about this character. And in order not to offend anybody in the potential audience or potential sponsors, they had changed the look of the character in the photographs. They had taken away the arched eyebrows and made them look normal and taken the points off my ears. And I thought, that's the end of me. Obviously, they don't want me or my character in this show. But Gene persisted. And within about 5 or 6 weeks after the show went on the air, the mail for Spock was so heavy that the network did a total turnaround, and they were now calling Gene Roddenberry and saying, put him in more scenes. We want to see more of him. So it caused some anguish for the writers because we were already shooting. And typically, at the end of Act 2 of a 3-act episode of Star Trek, the way they were constructing these things was Captain Kirk would say, well, there's a problem on the planet. I'm going to go down and solve this problem now, which meant that he would go down and deal with the heavy or the creature or whatever it was for the last act, and we'd be sitting up on the Enterprise biting our nails like, is it going to be okay? And now, because the network had decided they wanted to see more of Spock, he'd say, I'm going down to the planet, Spock, you come with me. So I would go down and stand around on the planet and watch him take care of the heavy until the writers were able to catch up with what was happening and integrate us successfully. I would come down and be a spectator, kind of trying to help him, but not really written into the scene yet because the writers hadn't caught up with this idea. So that was the process, and gradually we found our way, and then the Dr. McCoy irritation, you know, McCoy and Spock being so different in personality. I used to say that McCoy and Spock, the two of them together, made a Kirk. You know, there was the logical side and the emotional side, and that was how the triangle kind of was structured. I think one of the wonderful things about the character, the way it was written and designed, was that it played to the audience's intelligence and appealed to the audience's intelligence. This is a bright character, and it makes people feel good that they get it. They understand how he's operating, how he's functioning. There's also another very, very important aspect of the Spock character, which is that he's half human, and he's fighting that all the time. He's trying to control that all the time. So you have this split and this tension, internal tension between the logical, precise, rational, scientific Vulcan side and the emotional human side. And I think that is a split that all of us humans understand about ourselves. We deal with these issues in everyday life. Should I get upset about this, or should I just try to work it through logically? That's a very human condition. Does this person hurt my feelings, or is there something here that I should I put that aside and deal with it in terms of what's the facts? What are we trying to accomplish here? Should I fly off the handle and act out, or just simply try to solve the problem? These are very human questions that we deal with every day. And my role in Interplay's game, obviously, is the character of Spock, and very classic role, very classic function, to help Captain Kirk solve problems, to provide information, to be a sort of a different point of view for him. He looks at a situation in a certain way. I might say, Captain, you should be aware that such and such. Or, Captain, I have discovered that so-and-so. Here's some information. Captain, I have certain tools that I can offer you. I have the ability to read a person's mind. I have the ability to do a neck pinch on a person and render that person unconscious. I have the ability to function as a computer under certain situations. I have the ability to interpret scientific data for you. What would be useful to you? What would you like? Would you like me to perform a function here that only a Vulcan or a scientist can perform? So in that way, it's very classic. Support the captain, help him solve problems, and be of as much use as I can be. I'm really very pleased with what Interplay's writers and designers have captured. I think that the people who are designing these games for Interplay are very much in touch with what really makes these characters and makes Star Trek tick. I think I have had a very easy time performing the material because I get what they're after, because I think they understand how the characters work with each other and what the characters' functions are. They certainly have captured Spock's attitude, his speech, his precision of mind, his sense of humor, which is very important, big part of the character, his interaction with Kirk, his interaction with McCoy. So I would say, if I had a chance to speak to all of them, congratulations. I think they've done a great job.
All right, well, that was a rather lengthy interview, but I think I agree with a lot of the points he was making there. Certainly, I can only imagine his reaction if he were still alive now and, say, Ubisoft or an indie studio, someone was going to make a VR Star Trek adventure game true to the ideals of Star Trek. Maybe not necessarily playing a main character like Kirk, but, you know, if he could be involved in that, I think if he was impressed by the ability to tell a story and to make decisions in this game, he'd be blown away by what we could accomplish today. And I think it's sad that he's not here to experience that. Alright. Actually, fun fact, because he was talking about the Spock being seen as a devil figure. After the pilot, Gene Roddenberry was told Majel Barrett played number 1, the first officer, and Spock was the science officer, so they were 2 separate positions. And the producers told Gene, you can have the Martian, or you can have the woman, but you can't have both. Obviously, we know he chose Spock over number 1, and he assumed the role of first officer and science officer, which was a little bit unusual compared to later Trek series where they were separate positions, but I think I'm glad it turned out that way. Alright, let's see what our next stop is here. Credits. Executive producer, Alan Pavlish. Producer, Ken Allen. Director for Gene Roddenberry interview footage, Don Beck. Director for Leonard Nimoy interview footage, Lester Wisprod. Documentary script, Richard Mulligan. Documentary video editing, Dennis Miller. Layout and design, Todd Lonehurst. Rendered images, Tim Wilcox. Sound effects, Charles Dinan. Sound mastering, Craig Duman. Sergio Bustamante. Video digitizing and mastering, Bill Stott. Biographical sketches, Ken Allen. Programming, Chris Jones, John Price, Paul Allen Edelstein. Gene Roddenberry interview footage and Enterprise Bridge designs. Copyright 1981, 1995, Paramount Pictures Incorporated. All rights reserved. Star Trek and Star Trek insignia are registered trademarks of Paramount Pictures Incorporated. Star Trek Judgement Rites and Star Trek Judgement Rites souvenir disc, copyright 1995, Paramount Pictures Incorporated and Interplay Productions. Actually, going off of what Leonard Nimoy said about congratulating the Interplay crew on their work on this game, I have noticed, I remember seeing the credits scene for Starfleet Academy, and you could tell from the pictures they had in there that they were all huge Star Trek fans, which undoubtedly is why they were able to make such good games. Alright, I guess we just teleport across the bridge now. Can we, Okay. Making a Star Trek Judgement Rites. Huh. Watch the entire documentary, obviously.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its mission? To explore strange new worlds, to discover new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
When Star Trek first appeared on television in 1966, there was no such thing as a personal computer. The viewer could get no closer to Gene Roddenberry's world than his or her imagination. Now, however, computer technology allows anyone who owns a computer to not just watch, but to participate in the adventures and interact with the crew of the Enterprise. Not so long ago, one person, with the aid of one or two programs and a creative flair, could design, develop, and market the next generation of computer games. In this age of faster computers, more complex programming languages, and demands by players for ever more complicated adventures, this is no longer true. The age of multimedia has arrived, and with it, the need for larger budgets, longer development times, and a team of talented individuals in a variety of crafts. Just what does it take to create a game the size and complexity of Interplay's Star Trek Judgement Rites?
Consumers of today's computer products, especially entertainment products, have come to expect a great deal from them. Computer games now have fully rendered graphics, and they have the highest quality possible sound. And also, the gamer is expecting a very plausible storyline. So with all of that in mind, we spared no expense to guarantee that not just the gamer, but the Star Trek fan, who's also a gamer, would have a very satisfying experience from playing this game.
Let's put the pieces together and see how Judgement Rites was made. It starts, of course, with an idea. Brian Fargo, founder and president of Interplay Productions.
What we want to do is create a game that was a simulation of the original Star Trek series as opposed to a simulation of Star Trek. And so in doing so, we wanted to do something that was very episodic in format so that people could sit down each night and solve an episode and up to its final resolution by using their brains and their skills, and do it over a series of 8 different episodes that are all linked together with a common theme. We felt that this was the closest you could get to simulating the original series rather than doing one big adventure that would take, say, 40 or 50 hours to complete.
The plot of Judgment Rites is one familiar to science fiction fans. An alien race, the Brassicans, are conducting a test. The subjects of the test are the crew of the Enterprise and the crew of a Klingon warship. How they conduct themselves during the test will determine the fate of both civilizations for centuries to come. Failure could mean isolation, or worse.
Rusty Butchert was the producer for the original floppy disk-based version of Star Trek Judgement Rites. And he produced a very wonderful game where the story is based on the Klingons and the Federation and how they're being evaluated by this race who call themselves the Brassicans. All 8 episodes that we present in Star Trek Judgement Rites are set against this backdrop. And in several episodes, there are confrontations with the Klingons or with Trelane or with some other characters. And the Brassicans are testing the mettle of Kirk and his crew. And at the same time, they're testing the abilities of the Klingons to handle those situations. When finally, at the end, the crew of the Klingons and the crew of the Enterprise are brought together, where they face the Brassicans and face a mental challenge, which the player now has to think in terms of, if I was Kirk in this situation, what would be the best thing for me to do?
Crafting the overall plot line and the individual stories falls to the scripters. Marco Green, author of the Judgment Rites scenario, Museum Piece.
Designing a computer adventure game is a rather imposing task. It's not just that you're writing and designing a single story at one time. A scenario is essentially several stories going on at the same time. It's kind of a good way to visualize it. Imagine a tree, and the story starts at the base of the tree, and every time you work up and a player makes an action or decision, the story and scenario branch out. And some of these branches can have radical changes to the entire story. Some will lead to some sort of failure. You can put yourself in a position that not even James T. Kirk can get you back out. When you design a game like this, you don't want just one answer. There shouldn't be any one single right path. This essentially wouldn't be much different than watching TV or a movie. Then you know where the story starts and ends. This we want to create something where you can have several different endings, again, very different endings to your entire story. This creates a lot of complexity to the work because you're not only working off these story branches, but at the same time you have to take into account things like the computer interface, how the player is actually going to be able to look at an item, what he sees when he looks at the item. Can he pick something up? Can he manipulate it? All these sort of computer functions also make an effect on your story and what you're trying to tell and how you tell it. All that is just for one story, one scenario. Now in Judgment Rites we had 8 scenarios, and to top on all these other little complexities, all 8 scenarios had to have a connecting thread. So that meant that even if one scenario had maybe 4 different endings, each one of those endings had to logically progress this overriding story theme. So again, it's just one more thing to throw in this entire mix, which meant that all the writers, Liz Danforth, Mike Stackpole, Scott Benny, and I, we all had to do quite a bit of communication on this project.
Once the plot line and episodes have been decided on, the next critical element is the visual one. Graphic art, the backgrounds, characters, and objects, is a crucial aspect to any multimedia project. It is a time-consuming process which requires excruciating detail to provide a rich visual atmosphere. So, how do we get this from this? Todd Camasta, head of Interplay's art department, explains.
Star Trek Judgement Rites was a sequel from the original 25th anniversary. So we had already established a look and a style. It has also made our job easier is the fact that it is an established look from the 70s. The series is 70s high tech. So we already had a style. We had personalities already established by famous actors. Our job was to take that interface from the first game and to put it into the sequel.
Sometimes there are some people on a project that are just better animators or better background people, and what we try to do is to use those strengths to make an animation better or make the process run smoother, faster, whatever. On one part of this project, I was basically a fill artist, where a person I was teamed up with was a much better animator, and he would go ahead and do the line art, and I will take his line art and color it in. And to me, that's fine. That's part of the art process. I don't mind doing things like that. It might seem like grunt work to somebody else, but it's part of what we do as artists, and you just do it.
The sequel for Judgment Rites, we put more humor into it. We knew that there would be voices. It made it a little bit easier, a little more fun. And I think that was the key to managing 11 people, is to make it fun. And they all had the same goal. When you're doing a sequel, it is a lot more easier to have a goal, have a finishing line, have the light at the end of the tunnel. So it made it a little more easier for me on the second run, managing this many people.
Once the team has created the visual elements of the game, it's time to add voices to the characters. Here, I'm taping voiceover dialogue from the Judgment Rites script. Unlike a movie or television plot where there's only one outcome, a linear plot line, if you will, in this interactive adventure, I frequently have to read 2, 3, or sometimes even 4 alternate texts for the same situation. As the player makes decisions that affect the direction a game scenario will take, the appropriate response will be played. Recording and then preparing the over 13,000 separate lines of dialogue is the task of Charles Deenan and his staff of sound engineers.
Star Trek Judgement Rites, the largest voice editing project Interplay Audio Department has ever taken on, includes over 240 hours of recorded material, 7 binders of scripts, over 3 months of work, and it all ends up on one single CD-ROM. Beginning with the raw tapes, which was recorded at some of Hollywood's finest studios, we then transferred the audio into our computers and began working on the balance and tone of the sound in each character. Once everything is transferred into our computers, we use them to manipulate and create a tone and balance so that when it comes out on your speakers, it's the best possible sound, and you feel like you're in the game.
Recording the 13,000 lines in Judgment Rites required 28 actors in addition to the familiar cast from Star Trek. The actors were recorded at different times and in a variety of studios. To ensure that the dialogue would fit together seamlessly and flow naturally, Interplay hired professional voiceover director and performer Michael McConaughey of The VoiceWorks to coordinate and direct the effort.
The experience of directing these people was pretty phenomenal for me because, as everyone else in the project, I saw these people as heroes from the time I was a lot younger than I am now. And the opportunity to work with them, to be accepted as an equal with them in this thing, was just an astounding experience. The idea of directing someone like Leonard Nimoy or William Shatner, who are quite capable directors in their own right, was a little daunting, but they were exceptionally forgiving and very accepting. And there was not a clinker in this cast of the original cast of Star Trekkers. They were all, without exception, giving and quick. I mean, at this point, obviously, they know what they're doing, but as far as the supporting actors we cast, the 28 people who had really a rough job, because in many cases they were tripling roles, which everyone says, well, you know, a good actor can do it, but it's a lot different to do it, as in this case, working in a vacuum almost. It was the actor in the booth and the director out front, and there's no one in there to react with. And sometimes we're able to set up the circumstances for the actor, and sometimes not. And these people did not have 25 years of experience to pull back on. But they snapped in very quickly, and in some instances, in the space of 15 minutes, they'd be a human security guard or talking broccoli, depending on the scenario. And it was an awful lot of fun, both to work with them and for them to work in this, because it was cutting-edge technology, and it was Star Trek.
We now have 3 of the critical elements in the making of Judgment Rites. There's still one overriding job to be finished, however. The pieces have to be assembled into a game, something with which the player can interact and control. That's the task of an unusual group of latter-day wizards.
By the time all the parts get to the programmer's been involved in the original design. He's helped to give the artists and the musicians and the game designers and the writers limits on what you can technically do. Then it's the programmer's job to somehow exceed those limits, because the artists and the musicians and everybody else will naturally want 110% of what you told them they could have. So now it's our job to somehow put it all together, come up with that 110%, and still make it a great game where you're playing it and you forget that you're playing a game.
We've looked at the parts. Now let's see what one short scene looks like when all the pieces are put together.
Captain, the computer is locked into an infinite loop. It will continue playing the game until it defeats itself. I can interrupt the moves and input my own.
Try rook to queen's level 3. That will threaten its bishop.
We are maintaining a stable position with its game. We may attain a stalemate if we want that.
I don't want to lose. Let's support our queen with a pawn.
That was not a very good move, Captain. Quite poor. I would not enter any chess tournaments if I were you, Captain.
Spock, you wound me. Now watch me take his rook with my knight on queen's level 1.
Mate in 3 moves, Jim. Actually, 4 moves, Doctor. But it has become irrelevant. It has resigned.
The brief scene from Star Trek Judgement Rites you just witnessed took 12 people and several days to complete. When you add up all the scenes, the actors, sound and video engineers, artists, and programmers needed to put them all together, you begin to realize why a modern multimedia title takes months of effort and is such a monumental task.
There's literally thousands of details, and when it all comes together, it's very, very gratifying. But I suppose the most awesome responsibility we have is having inherited the vision of Gene Roddenberry from his original show. There are some great expectations for us. And when we meet those expectations and have a great game that people can enjoy, that is the biggest thrill of all. And I hope that people who play the game have experienced the same kind of thrill that the people, myself and the rest of the staff, experienced while we were putting the game together.
In this brief time together, we've examined how the various elements of Judgment Rites, from concept to finished game, were pulled together by the combined efforts of dozens of gifted individuals. We hope you'll enjoy this, the second of Interplay's computer sojourns with the crew of the Enterprise. Already, more Star Trek games are in production. As you help guide Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, and the rest of the crew past the tough spots in Star Trek Judgement Rites, be gentle. We'll need them all on the planet Vulcan for the next adventure.
A bit of a allusion to Star Trek The Secret of Vulcan Fury, which, well, I'm furious it got canceled. But no, making a game is intensive work in these days. Like, this was unusual for having such a high-profile cast, I think, back in the day. But nowadays, like, almost every AAA game, so-called AAA game, I guess, since I don't think there's any hard criteria for it, but most of the major studios, you know, they're lacing their games with actors, famous Hollywood actors, and having them voice stuff. And in the earlier interview with Nimoy about his experiences, he mentioned that he thinks that having a variable storyline like this, or like a choose your own adventure, make your own adventure, is more suitable for multimedia like PC games because they were cheaper to make and it's easier. And back then, it was certainly true, but you look at these days, and at this point, gaming costs almost as much or good game, especially from a high-profile studio, which probably bloats the costs a bit, but when they're hiring all these voice actors, from Hollywood and stuff, all these famous people, and putting together all the voice lines and doing all the scenes, it probably starts approaching the cost it takes to make a movie. So you can't really say. I mean, obviously movies are still pretty expensive. It's like $100 million for the big movies, but at easily a couple million, if not tens of millions of dollars for some of these bigger games. Excuse me. They're getting in that range where they are equivalent. They're above the budget of a lot of movies out there. The ones that don't necessarily make it to the theaters or the TV, but you can find in Netflix or Amazon Prime or in a bargain bin of $2 DVDs somewhere. I think what he says is still relevant, though, that this is a format more suited for gaming than movies, because I do think when people go to watch a movie, they do want to be passive. Whereas when people play a game, they want to be active. And, certainly I think the latest attempts at reviving the choose your own movie type thing, like, what was it, Black Mirror Bandersnatch or whatever, like that kind of didn't go so hot. And I think the market for that is mostly in full motion video PC adventure games, which I plan on playing one for my next game, actually, after this, to take a bit of a break from Star Trek. But I think that's kind of the gray zone where the two can meet, but otherwise this form of interactive storytelling, I think, is still going to be mostly reserved to gaming, at least for the time being. In any case, let's continue on here. So, how do we get out of here? Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we're just teleporting there, so this would be the next station. Interview with Gene Roddenberry.
I was a freelance writer who got tired of writing scripts about nothing at all, and I began reading science fiction. And among the science fiction I read was the Swift's about the Lilliputians. And I began to see from that you could write about something in science fiction. And so I dreamed up the Star Trek idea so that I could comment on man and society. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. They thought that I made it too complicated. They felt I had offered them a wagon train to the stars, which I had, because I wanted to sell it. And Westerns were very big at the time. And I felt that I'd double-crossed them. I'd written them this thing about where the mind went in certain ways, and they wanted someone with bare knuckles in a fist fight. They turned it down, but they did like some parts of it. The first time they said they'd ever felt like they were truly in a spaceship. And they turned it down. They said, now, if you will really give us the equivalent of a Western, we can put you back to work on it. So we made them a second show, which had a lot of science fiction elements too, but at least it ended up with Bill Shatner in a bare-knuckle fist fight in which he beats a godlike figure in a fair brawl. And I thought it was a terrible idea, but it worked and it met their needs, and that started us. We sold Star Trek with it. Jeffrey was a good actor, and it was good to have him on the show. However, his wife kind of felt that science fiction was a little beneath him. And so they didn't want to go on to a second pilot. Bill Shatner then came available, thank God, because Bill did a marvelous job, as we know from 20 years of reruns. And with it behind him, we put the series together. It was both. It was sort of a little fakery on my part too, because Westerns were exciting then, and they could understand Wagon Train, whereas very few people in those days read science fiction, and almost no network executives or studio heads. And they thought in terms of Buck Rogers and of naked girls in silver breastplates, and nothing about what the heart of real science fiction is, stories about people and ideas. And so I had to fake a little bit to get them to watch it. Well, I had enough up and downs, so when I came back to Paramount and we started talking about a second run of Star Trek, which became the Next Generation, I said I wasn't interested. I just, in all of those years of doing 78 Star Trek episodes, the emotional cost was too much. I was being censored because they claimed we had open mouth kisses, and they were measuring. We had a whole show thrown off the air because a lady's navel was seen in it. And although the next year, the networks came out with Laugh-In, and belly buttons were wild then. It's a ridiculous way for a writer to lead his life, to have junior executives who don't know writing and don't know science fiction telling you cannot do this or you must do this. I'm an artist, basically. That's what artists have done since time immemorial. That's why you've always had artists, even with cavemen and so on. It is a basic and necessary function for humanities. Artists explain everything that we see and explain why it's important. And art is not a thing of deft, beautiful writings or sculpturing of music. It's a thing of comment. I had always been a fan, speaking of Westerns, of Gunsmoke, and with their cast of Kitty and Doc and Chester and so on. And I noticed how well that worked over episode after episode. And I thought, if I ever do a series, I want to do the same type of thing where the characters are like Uncle Joe drops by, and there's Dad, and there's Brave Brother, and so on. And so I really cast my Star Trek people as a television family. And you knew what their secrets were, and you would laugh at the same joke every week, as you do in real life. Captain Kirk is Captain Hornblower of the sailing ships, who was a great hero, and Hemingway said is the most exciting adventure fiction in the human language. Myself, I had screwed up so many times in life through emotions. I thought, wouldn't it be fun to write someone who is totally emotionless and logical? Chekhov came on the show because I'd read something, and someone had sent me a copy of a Russian newspaper in which they said after our first year, the ugly Americans are at it again. We were the first people in space, but the Americans don't even have a Russian aboard this crew. So I wrote the Russian aboard the crew and sent a copy of it to the Communist Youth newspaper, which they never answered. When I was trying to find a name for Nichelle Nichols, and thought of the Swahili for freedom, which is uhuru, and decided to feminize it, make it uhura. I knew I could hear her shriek of joy from across town. I was pleased that in those days, when you couldn't get even blacks on television, that I not only had a black, but a black woman and a black officer. And that'll show them. Great affection I have for Asians and what they do and the important part they play in the world, and I just could not have a group of Earth people without including that great, one half or more of the Earth continents. Scots have always been shipbuilders and ship engineers and so on, and that was a bow to tradition, and a great fun bow too. Because it speaks to some basic human needs that there is a tomorrow. It's not all going to be over with a big flash and a bomb. That the human race is improving, that we have things to be proud of as humans. No, astronauts, ancient astronauts did not build the pyramids. Human beings built them because they're clever and they work hard. And Star Trek is about those things. I feel that my principal love is writing words, language. Probably if I had started directing early, I would have enjoyed it very much, because certainly the director, particularly in motion pictures, is the man in charge of a production, which is sort of the reason I decided to, after producing the first Star Trek movie, I decided to go back to television, because in television, the writer-producer is the man. And I was more interested in getting my ideas over than I was in making a movie that looked good. Well, I'm very close to the people at NASA and places like that, as at MIT and so on. And I learn a lot from them, and they call me with ideas. As a matter of fact, one of the advanced planners of NASA is arriving in town today, and I'll be having some meetings with him next week. They've been very helpful. I was very afraid when I started Star Trek that scientists and NASA people would say, "Oh God, you're so inaccurate and you're so wrong," and I almost hated to deal with them at first, until I discovered that they're not like that. They're intelligent, and because they're intelligent, they understand the problems of show business, and they understand that I had to appeal to a mass audience as well as a specialized audience. And it's been a love feast. Someone asked me some years ago, before I'd ever gotten any kind of a check for Star Trek reruns, what is your profit on the series? And I said, the greatest profit of all, the people that I could not pay to meet and know, Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, and the NASA people, and the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab where I'm welcome. Wow, you can't buy that. Far too many people believed, and many still believe, that they're a bunch of teenagers who wear odd clothing and give odd signs and things, but they're not. Trekkers include businessmen, bank presidents, stockbrokers, college professors, and a large number of astronauts, of whom I saw a couple 2 nights ago who were out here. Trekkers are really, it also includes the kids, and God bless them and let them have fun. But it's people who sort of believe in the general type of thing we're talking about in Star Trek, that the human species is to be admired, and it is really going to go somewhere. Well, the fans were wild for the idea, and I kind of liked the idea too. I was broke. People were not exactly standing in line to hire the guy. I was a much sought-after freelance writer until I did Star Trek. Then the story got around town that I had done this crazy series that practically broke the studio from its costs and all that sort of thing, and I couldn't get much work. I figured from the movie, maybe I could get involved to the point of making some money, which my wife and I desperately needed to pay our mortgage and so on. And so I guess I was encouraged by greed as much as by a chance to see what Star Trek could do on the big screen and with an adequate budget and so on. And I'm glad we went along that way. And when I didn't want to produce them, Harv Bennett came along, and he did a very good job. He was a very experienced producer, and I was delighted to leave that in his hands, with myself keeping the consulting function. First Star Trek series, we treated such things as mixed races aboard the spaceship, and whether women could be in charge of anything and so on. And when we shocked the audience by saying yes to those questions. In the new series, with new characters and new attitudes, we have a chance to deal with still more important questions, and questions of the 80s and the 90s, such as the question of terrorists. The question last year we touched on the question of drugs. Why do people take drugs? Because they're bad? Obviously, there's more to it than that. I want to touch on the problems of superstitions which rule the world and set people bombing each other. I respect them. There are all sorts of trekkers, from teenagers to businessmen to professionals, and they're people who want this. Largely, they want the same sort of things out of humanity that I want. And it's strange to go to a meeting of people who are, some of whom are wearing strange clothes and making strange signs and so on, and find out that they're very serious and they care deeply about who and what this creature human is. Well, they kept it alive through their clubs and their various meetings and so on, and for which, but they kept it alive because they enjoyed doing these things. They enjoy their conventions just as much as veterans enjoy their conventions. I've never let trekkers, though, run Star Trek, because Star Trek is an artistic endeavor that is best run by the professionals. And I will listen to trekkers and trekkies. I will listen to the guard at the gate and get many good ideas those ways. But no, I will never make a change in Star Trek because I think it will please the trekkers. In that way lies prostitution. And you cannot be a good producer, writer, or anything if you first thing you ask is, what do they want? That's what prostitutes do. I write what I think they should have and what I think they'll enjoy. And thank God I've been right occasionally. Because it says it's not all over. It's not all, we're not going to go up in smoke. We're going to make it. Because it says the human adventure has just begun. That's it in a nutshell. I would hope there are bright young people growing up all the time who will bring to it levels and areas that were beyond me. And I don't feel jealous about that at all. I think that, as I was saying, Hollywood and the motion picture industry is a remarkable thing. And it'll go on without any of us and get better and better and better, because that really is the human condition, is to improve and improve. Get lost, to go through the things I went through with network executives and so on, to do it all over again. On the first show, on the original Star Trek, I practically lost my family from working so many 12-hour days, 14-hour days, 7 days a week. And I said, you can't pay me enough to do that. But then they said, hey, but suppose we did it in a way in which they call syndication, in which we don't have a network and we don't have all those people. And Paramount was saying to me, and we guarantee to you that you will be in charge of the show. I asked who would be the censor. They said, you. You've been around television long enough to know what doesn't play and what can't. And very slowly I began to be, and then it occurred to me that we couldn't possibly do it with the old cast. The old cast was doing movies. You couldn't afford them in the first place. Nor could you do it with the old cast because the crew people you have who need encouragement, who need to have their thing. People don't just work for money. The mixers, the cameramen, and all of those people have to have their show. And with a new cast, it could be that way. It could have new ideas and so on. The whole group could say, as they say today, it's our Star Trek. And you desperately need that. After doing all of those episodes, are there new things you can do? My God, yes. The basis of our series is the galaxy, and there's quite a few stories out there. I decided that we can't have people smoking. Although I smoked in those days, the networks advertised cigarettes. I said, man, we'll just be too smart to keep this up. So I said, no one smokes, which caused lots of problems. I feel the same thing about drinking today, and I hasten to say I drink and enjoy it. We're too smart to continue that for long, and we have invented for the barroom something called synthanol, which acts just the same as alcohol, makes you feel that you can be a lover or wise or all the things that alcohol does, but it's only temporary. You with the force of will, you can shove it aside and you're as sober as you ever were. So our ship will have synthanol. No, it makes me nervous because it isn't good enough what we did, and we've got to now build on that and make it better. Once you begin sticking your tongue out, literally or figuratively, at people, your brain goes too, and you end up with a show that is crap. And I want Star Trek to do the things it can do. I've never felt that I had it made. What we can expect in the future is to continue to explore the human creature and what our problems is, and the things I talked about, the place superstition is playing in destroying harmony between nations and so on. Also, I'd like to get a little bit into the absurdities of 20th century politics, which we can look back on from the 24th century. And we'll consider the 20th century something that we had to go through, but our people will see it as something they're glad to be rid of, you know. Paramount said, we will back you in this, and by God, they did. And I've had nothing but good treatment out of them. I do feel sometimes they were nervous about giving the keys to the asylum to a writer, but despite their nervousness, they stood true to their word, and I really respect them and thank them. There's a guy who knows something about what Star Trek should be, but doesn't know it all, and I see Star Trek as part of the continuing education of Gene Roddenberry. I learn new things every day about science and humanity and history. They're paying me to go to college and paying me very richly, and I thank them.
And certainly I think that shows that Gene Roddenberry certainly kept striving to be better and better. When he was talking about inclusivity, obviously he wasn't able to include everyone. For example, not the Middle East, Africa, I guess, in the form of Uhura, but not South America. And then representation of other continents was pretty sparse, while Europe and United States and North America were overrepresented. But some of that may be just as much due to the politics of the time and the racism of the time as it was. And certainly we can see an improvement in Roddenberry, I think, even from the original series where all the women were wearing those mini skirts and high heels, and then you get to the TNG era where now the women are dressed just like the men. He even had men in kilts in a couple episodes of the first season of Star Trek, The Next Generation. So I think he's right in that Star Trek has improved him over time, just as I hope it would improve all of us over time. But if he thought 20th century politics are crazy, he ain't seen nothing on 2020. Alright, so I believe we have one more consulate. No, that's it. Alright, then that appears to be it for our behind-the-scenes look at Star Trek Judgement Rites. So, and with that, concludes these voyages of the Starship Enterprise as they are recorded in 25th Anniversary and Judgement Rites. And hopefully next time, obviously not, this slot's going to be devoid of Star Trek for a little while, but next time I'm looking to come back with a new adventure a couple of years later than this, in the TOS refit era, or the motion picture era, I guess, if you want to call it that, with a new crew and their adventures and their stories. So with that, thank you all for everything, for watching this. Stay safe out there, and hopefully we'll see you next time.